Hi. I do feel a little bit weird after all these very practical demonstrations and tech things. I am mostly going to be talking about politics, so I don't have any explosions or anything to go with it. Yeah, moral explosions. So yeah, my name is Ruth. I'm the supporter officer at Open Rights Group, and for those of you who haven't heard of us, we're a UK-based campaign group who work at the intersection between technology and human rights. So, for example, things like how does web censorship or web blocking affect our access to information? How does the right to edit videos of copyright works allow us to criticize corporations? How should access to genealogical records be open for everybody rather than for payment? Various quite broad different things. But one of the major things that we work on is the right to privacy and how that relates to the internet. And it's obviously been something we've worked on for quite a long time. We were previously very strongly campaigning on what's colloquially referred to as the Snoopers Charter or the Communications Data Bill, which was a bill proposing the police have quite broad surveillance powers, allowing them to gather people's emails and phone records and that kind of thing. And we ran a big campaign on it for 2 years, and we won. It was lovely. It got removed from the Queen's speech. Everything was good. And then 2 months later, Edward Snowden happened. And we were like, everything we'd been kind of saying shouldn't happen turns out was already happening with NSA and GCHQ, who are the two major security agencies in America and in Britain. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. What exactly did we find out? What is it we don't like about it? And what are we going to do about it? I've got a slide. So a lot of the information you might have heard about Edward Snowden is things about America and the NSA. A lot of the reporting is focused on what's happening over there. And you'll have seen the comedy wiretapping eagle kind of floating around the internet. But we think what's happening at GCHQ with their kind of evil donut is just as bad. So the first leaks happened on 21st of June 2013. And one of the very first revelations that we had was that GCHQ were engaging in bulk collection of communications data by wiretapping fiber optic cables and storing communications data. And that's what was referred to as tempora, and that's what I'm going to focus on, although there were a lot of other leaks that came out at that time. So GCHQ has agreements with companies running international cables, and these cables, going in and out of the UK and also at some overseas stations, force companies to install equipment that duplicates all the information traveling through them and then sends the duplicate to GCHQ. They then store this data, and they create what they call a time machine of the internet, which I was really disappointed is not a time machine, and just means that they can recapture someone's history of the internet for a few days. They can kind of replay at slow speed everything someone did over a period of time, and that's why they call it a time machine, because they've just kind of kept that moment and then look at it again. And the amount of data they collect is about 21,000 terabytes a day. You know who else handles that much data a day? Google. So kind of comparison of what they're doing. So what happens next? This information is then processed through a number of different filters. They discard everything they think has low intelligence value, like videos of armadillos and sleeping badgers, and chuck it out. And then they store everything they think is actually useful, like people's phone numbers, usernames, email addresses. And then they separate the content from what they refer to as the metadata, which they then keep for a further period of time. Metadata is kind of a key term in all of this. Whenever you hear politicians talking about mass surveillance, they'll always say it's just metadata. And they want to use that to assure you that they're not reading anything of value. In fact, in a recent Lords debate on data retention, which is a different story, a Lord said that nobody understands what metadata means, and if they did, they wouldn't be bothered. And I think that's kind of wrong and also patronizing, because plenty of people do know what it means. But if you don't, it's basically the information that's the data around a communication. So communication is like a tweet or an email. And the content is what you actually said in the email, but the metadata is everything else, like who it was to, where did you send it, who it was from, like what operating system you were using, you know, all those other bits, which is actually quite a lot of information. So when they've got this, who's looking at it? There's a really strong link between American security agencies and spies and British security agencies and spies. In fact, they're so together, it's really hard to kind of separate out who's looking at what and like what programs are happening. But we do know that in America, they have quite strict laws about not spying on their own citizens. They're definitely telling everyone that they are not spying on Americans. They're only spying on foreigners, which is us. And we are also aware that there are some restrictions in UK law about British spies spying on us, but we're not really sure that those laws apply to Americans and how much is being shared. We know there are a lot of NSA officials who also have access to this tempora data. And in the UK, we have a much lower oversight regime anyway for accessing things. So the data sharing is pretty bad, basically. And the Americans have a Linux-based system that they've built called X-Keyscore, which is kind of a search engine of personal information for people across the world. I'm not freaking people out with all this stuff. And because that information is actually available to people in other countries as well, what they call like the Five Eyes Alliance, and that includes Australia and Canada, and potentially Israel. We're not really sure, at least some of it may be. And we've at least got figures that about 850,000 NSA employees and private contractors do have access to GCHQ databases. So that's basically what Tempora is. There are, like, as I said, many other leaks and various things we heard about. For instance, there was a story about GCHQ playtesting with facial recognition software by taking webcam chats from Yahoo, which they said they were surprised by how much sexual material they came across. I was surprised that Yahoo had a webcam service. But they targeted 1.8 million users to create a facial recognition tool. This wasn't even because people were under suspicion. They just wanted to see if they could build it, and they needed some faces. And for all we know, that data might also have been available to Americans. And then there are other things like weakening encryption, inserting backdoors. That's a whole load of other stuff. I did have, oh look, I've got a picture of Obama reading everyone's emails. We also have a wiki. If you go to wiki.openrightsgroup.org, we have a list of basically all the revelations with a little bit of information and links to the stories, and you can go through that. And we also do a weekly update where if there's been any more leaks and information, we send them out. So if you want to subscribe to that, you can let me know. So yeah, those are the facts. And now I want to talk about why we care and why I think other people should care. And I think the problem is often that people feel that it's separate because it's on the internet, because it's electronic. But kind of the whole point of Open Rights Group is that we believe that technology doesn't mean your rights don't apply anymore. They should be the same no matter what technology we invent. That's why they're universal human rights. And, you know, take the Yahoo example. If the government came into your house while you were sleeping or having sex and said, we're just taking photos of you, don't worry, we're not going to use them for anything, we're just going to experiment with them. Be a bit like, can you go away, please? And as far as I'm concerned, it is the same thing. You should still have a right to privacy. And let's not forget that ultimately privacy is a law. This kind of spying is actually illegal, and it contravenes Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights and Article 10, the right to freedom of expression. And the European Court has said that surveillance of this kind will never be compatible with the European Convention. We at Open Rights Group actually have a legal case at the European Court at the moment, but Obviously, we're taking the government to court, which is quite challenging, and we don't think that a European decision should be the answer. We think that Parliament should actually make actions themselves, especially as the government really doesn't like Europe at the moment. So there are plenty of other issues that come out of this, that even if we take an acceptance that what's happening in the UK is okay because our government are lovely and we completely trust them, there's a really bad international example that we're setting. For instance, in the Australian Parliament, a member of the Australian Parliament recently stood up and said that they should do the same kind of thing and have a greater allowance for data retention. And they said, look at Britain, and quote, this is the way that Western states are going. And the problem is that if Australia does it, then New Zealand does it, and if New Zealand does it, then Canada does it, and then, you know, China and North Korea can really be like, everyone's doing it. We don't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to criticizing other countries. There's also problems with poor oversight of this. There are a few kind of mechanisms set up that are supposed to scrutinize. But for example, one of them is the Interception of Communications Commissioner, who's supposed to write an independent report every year about what's happening with surveillance, what warrants have been signed by the Home Secretary to give permission for this. But when he produces the report, it's mostly just a list of numbers. So for instance, there were 2,760 warrants signed for interception in 2013. But that doesn't actually tell you what they were for, or how many people that covered, or under what law they were authorized. It's actually just a number. It's completely meaningless. There's also an Intelligence and Security Committee in Parliament who are meant to provide further oversight. But appointments to the committee are made by the Prime Minister. So again, it's not really an independent oversight. There's been no official confirmation that the Tempora program exists, but they have defended the practice of bulk data retention in theory, and they refer to this as the needle in the haystack argument. And they said, this is a line from GCHQ after the first Snowden leaks. Essentially, we have a process that allows us to select a small number of needles in a haystack. We're not looking at every piece of straw. There are certain triggers that allow you to discard or not examine a lot of data, so we're just looking at needles. I'm sure you'll agree, makes everything very clear. You should see some of the other quotations that we had that were very long and just went on about needles and haystacks for quite a while. We have multiple haystacks and we're looking at different needles from separate haystacks. And what it's all about is like a giant farm, and they took the metaphor to quite a long point where we're just like, what are you even talking about now? Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just losing my place. They also have a couple of other counter-arguments. For instance, they say that if they do capture information that they're not supposed to, that's allowed as collateral damage to spying on terrorist suspects. And they also say that it's not so bad because their operatives generally forget everything they've looked at anyway. So that finally brings me to, oh, that picture didn't work. Oh well. That finally brings me around to Don't Spy on Us, which is the talk title, and what we're doing. So in America, the Obama administration has at least made some protestations about spying on their own citizens, and there have been quite a lot of discussions. You know, the Senate has talked about it. But in the UK, the government response has been something along the lines of, whilst we can't admit that we're watching you, you shouldn't mind if we are, and we can't tell you whether there's any oversight for these maybe existent programs, but we can tell you that if there is any oversight, which may or may not exist, it's really good. And just get on with your lives now, please. So the point of Open Rights Group is our lives is kind of talking about this stuff. So we're part of a coalition called Don't Spy on Us, who's made up of the influential organisations who work on privacy and free speech. That's Privacy International, English Pen, Open Rights Group, Big Brother Watch, Liberty, and Article 19. And there are lots of other kind of co-signed and supporting charities like Amnesty International, EFF, Public Concern at Work, Access Now. It's like lots of others who's kind of like signed on and give us help. And we are basically campaigning that Parliament relook at the laws that allow surveillance and draft a new law that uses these 6 principles, which are kind of the bedrock of all the work that we do. And these are the things that we think should be really clear about how the government use surveillance. So, number 1, no surveillance without suspicion. Basically, we do actually think it's appropriate that the police can track the activities of suspects, but they should have a reason. They shouldn't surveil everyone on the chance that someone is a criminal. They should use transparent laws, not secret laws. Again, that's the problem with the government not telling us which laws they're actually using to justify it. Laws should be open. That is the point of a democracy. There should be judicial, not political authorization. Warrants should be made by judges, not by the Home Secretary, which means that decisions are made impartially based on evidence rather than based on politics or expediency. There should be democratic oversight. As I've talked about before, scrutiny bodies that check up on what security agencies are doing should be operating in the law, and they should be impartial. The right to redress, again, you should have a right to seek compensation or justice if these principles are broken. And a secure web for all. So, there's finally some technology in here. It may be dropped on the end, but this one's actually very important. As I said earlier, a lot of the leaks have talked about the NSA and GCHQ trying to crack encryption standards or to insert backdoors, and also to kind of get involved in internet standard settings and infiltrate groups who work on that kind of thing. And that kind of thing makes the web weaker for everybody. You know, banning locks just because criminals use them doesn't actually make sense for everybody else. It actually makes us all more susceptible to fraud and other kinds of online crime. So what we're doing at the moment is quite a few different things. We've got 2 different legal cases. We've got one at the European Parliament and one at what's called the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which is a place which is kind of number 5. It's the closest we've got to that. We're also encouraging debates in Parliament. We organised a debate soon after the leaks came out. And we're doing things like this, talking to people about it. And we're running a petition and speaking to MPs and trying to make this an issue that comes up in manifestos. The Lib Dems did respond to a lot of this stuff and have made a digital rights manifesto in their kind of general manifesto. They've got a list of principles that they agree to. So what can you do? We want to make a massive petition ahead of the general 2015 election, and we want to make prospective MPs, candidates, and existing MPs really sit up and listen to this. So, you know, please sign the petition. It's at don'tspyonus.org. And also meet with your MP, talk to them about this, explain that it's important, tell them that they need to do a better job of scrutinising and of holding the government to account. And tell them that the UK should set an example. You know, we used to be able to speak really strongly about human rights to the rest of the world, and now we're shying away from even using that word. So we need to kind of bring back a sense of pride in human rights and equality. So yeah, the address again is don'tspyonus.org. I hope this was interesting, and please let me know if you have any questions.